If you're asked to name the world's wealthiest people, you'll likely cite Bill Gates or Jeff Bezos. Well, you aren't exactly wrong going with traditional sources such as the Forbes Billionaire List. However, some individuals aren't on this list, but control an immeasurable amount of dark wealth. The following 10 individuals and families control a vast amount of wealth, but for some reasons they choose to remain a secret. Say for instance, the privacy and wealth were acquired in non-savory ways. Number 10. Isabel dos Santos. Eldest daughter of Angola's longtime president José Eduardo dos Santos. Isabela dos Santos is Africa's wealthiest woman, valued at $3.6 billion. Back in 2012, Forbes valued her at $500 million, but only last year, her valuation increased to over $3 billion. This was not from savvy investment decisions, but rather due to her father transferring stakes in several Angolan companies to her. Of her over $3 billion net worth, 2/3, or $1.8 billion, corresponds to stocks in the Portuguese oil and gas company Galp. Shares were acquired through Sonangol, Angola's national oil company, but later transferred to her through backroom dealings. Though Isabel asserts that her wealth is clean, Maca Angola investigations prove that contrary to her assertions, the shares were acquired using public funds. Isabel dos Santos has managed to hide her wealth, or better yet, how she obtained it using a group of companies. To avoid any direct link to her, Isabel's interests in Galp are held indirectly through an offshore company. Esperanza owns 45% of Amorim Energia, which is the largest Galp shareholder with 38.4% ownership. There are a couple of reasons why Isabel dos Santos would instead not reveal her net worth and how she got it. First, it would lead to criminal investigations. And second, her deal with Sonangol through Esperanza Holding BV would be ruled null and void, and her shares in Galp would revert to the Angolan people. Number 9. Kim Jong-un. Kim Jong-un is said to be worth around $5 billion. This might not be so noteworthy compared to other individuals on this list, but it's still a massive net worth as North Koreans earn an average of $1,800 per year. This wealth was discovered back in 2013 through a joint investigation by South Korea and America. They managed to unearth how Kim Jong-un and his family had managed to hide their ill-gotten wealth by distributing it in over 200 foreign bank accounts across the world. The authoritarian dictator cannot risk exposing his vast wealth, as it would lead to an uprising against him, much like the Arab Spring, which led to the ousting of several longtime leaders. Even so, his leadership is based on fear and brainwashing people, so it's unlikely they could challenge his grasp on power as easily as citizens elsewhere have managed to. Number 8. Bashar al-Assad. We all know a bit about the lifetime leader of Syria, Bashar al-Assad, owing to the ongoing crisis to the country. Al-Assad is estimated to be worth between $1 and $1.5 billion, but this is only his realizable assets. The actual figure goes well beyond this, seeing as Assad and his close friends controlled over 60% of the country's assets during peacetime. The only issue with getting the real net worth of Bashar al-Assad is because his money trail is hard to trace, but sources put his fortune at around $120 billion. This wealth is difficult to account for, as it's in countries like Russia and Hong Kong with lackluster financial rules and offshore tax havens. Additionally, Assad has deployed a myriad of companies to disguise his wealth. Nonetheless, to reduce the risk of seizure, al-Assad cannot disclose his net worth, since America and European nations have made it their mission to freeze Assad's assets to undermine his regime. Number 7. Hosni Mubarak. Another authoritarian dictator, Hosni Mubarak amassed a vast amount of wealth worth between $40 and $70 billion during his 30-year rule as the president of Egypt. This sum is comparable to the value of other Gulf country leaders. He didn't squirrel away this much wealth from his salary, as he earned a measly $808 a month in 2007 and 2008. So it's mostly corruption money. Mubarak made his first millions through military contracts during his days as an officer in Egypt's Air Force, which he would later add to when he came into power through corruption and stifling of public resources. His sons, who were instrumental in increasing his vast wealth, took huge cuts from investing in Egyptian businesses, giving preferred entrepreneurs the capacity to operate as monopolies in the country. Mubarak has managed to hide his vast wealth in foreign banks and offshore accounts, while the rest is in real estate in prime cities such as Paris, Madrid, New York, and London. Nonetheless, he cannot openly disclose his fortune, as it's one of the reasons he was overthrown and could increase his criminal charges. Additionally, his accounts could be frozen. Number 6. Sultan Hassan al-Bolkiah. To paint a more realistic picture of the kind of obscene wealth we're dealing with here, this sultan owns over 600 Rolls-Royce automobiles and has the world's largest private residence with 1,788 rooms. Hassan al-Bolkiah is the Sultan of Brunei, and most of his wealth is from gas and oil sales. Back in the 90s, Hassan al-Bolkiah was the world's richest man, worth $40 billion, but this has since reduced to 20 billion in recent years. The Sultan does not concern himself with hiding his wealth, since it is tied to him, despite it being regarded as the country's wealth. He has put much of his wealth in real estate, acquiring properties like Monopoly pieces. He owns Asprey, the London jeweler to the Queen, the Dorchester in London, and Hotel Bel Air and Beverly Hills Hotel in LA. He also pays $21,000 for haircuts, something you'll know if you've seen our video on ridiculous purchases made by billionaires like him. Number 5. The House of Saud. It's not known as Saudi Arabia for no reason. It's named after the Saud family that has ruled the country from the 18th century. The family is valued at $1.4 trillion owing to their control of Saudi Arabia's oil reserves. Nonetheless, it's difficult to trace their wealth as it's distributed amongst its 15,000 family members through the National Welfare Program. Although only about 2,000 members control most of the wealth, it's still difficult to trace. Additionally, the royal family has managed to keep secret other income sources by designing projects to provide revenue for the king and his full-time brothers. These are highly secretive and subject to no ministry oversight. The Al Saud family cannot risk revealing their actual net worth as it's mostly skimmed from oil. In a meeting with the US ambassador back in 1996, one prince alluded to revenues from 1 million barrels of oil per day, going to only 5 or 6 princes. Such information would only fuel the anger of Saudi protesters dissenting for reforms. Also, it would bolster those who believe the kingdom is ready for a revolution. Number 4. Ratan Tata. Head of the Tata Group of companies, Ratan Tata is currently valued at only $1 billion. However, this does not reflect his real net worth. It's mind-boggling how the head of one of the world's top companies, according to market capitalization and reputation, is not amongst the world's wealthiest. The Tata Group runs 96 companies, of which 28 are publicly listed companies. These businesses also span all infrastructure industries like banking, steel, chemicals, hotels, power, and textiles. Ratan Tata's real wealth cannot be realized, as the companies are run by the principal company Tata Sons, whose chief owner is not Ratan Tata, but several charitable organizations with 65% ownership. This wealth does not show on Tata's financial statement, but he would be valued at around $85 billion if it was, making him the world's wealthiest man. Number 3. Carlos Slim Helú. According to some sources, Slim is worth $61.2 billion, making him the 6th wealthiest man in the world. This is the first time that Carlos has been out of the top 5 in nearly a decade. However, his actual net worth could reach $129 billion given the control he has over the Mexican economy. Carlos Slim Helú owns over 200 companies, and it's projected that roughly 40% of the Mexican stock exchange comprises of companies that are under his control. Additionally, Mexico has come to be known as Slimlandia, signifying the influence Slim Helú has on the average Mexican. It's quite difficult for a Mexican to spend a day without contributing to Carlos' wealth. They're born in his hospitals, drive on his roads, and use his telecommunication services. Most of Carlos' net worth comes from telecommunications and construction. With control of over 80% of all Mexico landlines and 70% of all cellular companies, Carlos can impose his will on how much Mexicans pay for communication. Between 2005 and 2009, Mexicans were overcharged by $6.5 billion a year for landlines. Also, Slim's dominance earned him $129 billion over the 5-year period. Though most of Carlos Slim Helú's wealth is illegal, he refrains from divulging its extent, as his actions have impoverished most of the country. It may lead to people boycotting his businesses. On the other hand, you have to applaud him on his success, especially given that he's done it legally. Number 2. Vladimir Putin. The Russian president is the world's wealthiest and most powerful man, and according to some financier estimates, is worth more than Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos combined, with a value of around $200 billion. According to Bill Browder, former CEO of Hermitage Capital Management, Putin has hired over 10,000 officials with instructions to kill, kidnap, and extort money from citizens by seizing their properties. Also, Putin uses his political clout to coerce Russian investors into signing over vast holdings of their companies to him. However, seeing as most of this wealth is ill-gotten, Putin cannot reveal his real wealth to avoid the risk of seizure. Also, to reduce the risks involved, he has put most of his wealth in company holdings, real estate, and other people's accounts. Number 1. Rothschild Family. With a valuation of over $2 trillion, the Rothschild family is the wealthiest family in the world and also one of the best-kept wealth secrets. This family's empire began with Mayer Rothschild back in the 18th century when he established banking and finance houses in Germany. With the help of his 5 sons, the Rothschild Bank became the first to transcend borders. With the careful cultivation of this wealth, the Rothschild benefited immensely during the French Revolution by funding and providing materials to Austria. They would later evolve into a multinational group and become a chief financier of war and industry. Of the 5 sons, Nathan Rothschild would go on to become the most successful, establishing the central banking structure we use today. Also, he used underhand tactics during England's war with Napoleon to cause panic in England, which led to the total collapse of England's stock exchange. At the time, his agent started snatching bonds at record low prices, and 2 days later, Nathan was in control of England's stock exchange. According to Investopedia, as of 2015, England was still paying back the Rothschild family for money owed from this Napoleonic fraud. The Rothschilds have managed to hide their wealth by dividing it amongst the many members of their family. Finally, they cannot reveal their massive wealth as it proceeds from wars and only shows the enormous income inequality in the world. Which secret billionaire surprised you the most? Also, how do you feel about their vast wealth?